We are good to go. Hey, everybody. Thank you, audience, for watching, coming in to see our live tonight. I wanted to apologize. I think we said we'd start at 10:45 and, it's a little bit later, but I know that eventually you guys will forgive me. That being said, this podcast will be really interesting, and I think a lot of information we'll learn and pick up about different cultures. We have two guests here, Garish and Parag. Thank you guys for coming on. And before we start, well, actually, as we're starting, if y'all wouldn't mind maybe giving a little bit of introduction as far as like who you are. Garish, I think since I had you on first, and if you don't mind, then Parag, please.
Sure. Thank you, Marcus. It's a wonderful opportunity, and the pleasure is mine for inviting me to this podcast. And about myself, Girish, I am from southern India. I came to United States to pursue my education almost 5 years ago. So still, I haven't explored much, but I'm getting to know a lot about Native American culture. And the more I come to know about the Native American culture, it is not very much different from the Indian culture. We share very similar traits, similar things, and that keeps surprising. And I do follow Indian the podcast and some wonderful things. So yeah, looking forward to share and I'll ask you guys a lot of questions. Yep. Thank you for having me here,
Yeah,
Marcus.
of
Yeah.
course. Thank you. I look forward to answering them to the best of my ability. um, and then, Garish, if you don't, Garish, sorry, if you don't mind me asking, I know you're from India, but where did you say you grew up in India?
So I'm from South India in a state called Andhra Pradesh, AP. So it was a united state, but there's a partition, so it's split into two states. So I spent most of my childhood in my native place called Vizag. So later I spent my other part of my life in its capital city, Hyderabad, so which is now a different state. So now the rest of my life here is in US for the last 5 years. So yeah, it's a rich state in terms of culture and traditions. So yeah, so it's south, and it's to the east. So yeah.
Yeah, India is such an like fascinating like country to me. So much history, like thousands of years. And I've only like barely scratched the surface of trying to understand it, just because it's so vast and diverse, and just so many things to learn. Just yeah, it's really, yeah, like I said, a fascinating place. Thank you, Garish, for that introduction, and hello, Prague. Thank you for coming in.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Emperor. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, everyone. I'm looking forward to learning everything from you because I'm not that familiar with Native American culture, so I'm here to learn and share what I gathered. I come from India as well. Come from northern part of India. Grew up there for 15 years. Lived in different places in mostly northern India. I came here in 2016, same as Girish. I've been here 5, 6 years. Sixth year is going on now. Wow, feels like forever. At the same time, it feels like yesterday. Um, I grew up in Haryana, small state, close to New Delhi. Lived in New Delhi for a couple of years before I got here. I'm currently working for Colonial State Police in their director's office, getting my master's in legal studies. And while I dabble with different sports, I am definitely curious about various things, culture. So Native American being something that I'm got really intrigued into once you mentioned, Marcus, that you do this podcast, and I'm honored and humbled to be on it and learn more from you guys and learn from everyone. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, the pleasure is ours. Thank you guys both. Juan Cholo, did you want to add anything? Or
Yeah, just thank you guys for coming on. I think this will make for a really interesting episode, especially because I know India and the U.S. Well, Native American lands and India were colonized very differently, had vastly different results. But I think there are some similarities we could also pick up on. I think it's just going to be an interesting conversation for everybody.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting further into this. And as I said earlier, I think we'll have our guest come in very soon because he'll want to chat as well.
Is that the guest that I think it is, Marcus? The one that you mentioned before earlier in the day, or is it somebody else?
No, it's going to be other Juan.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah. But yeah, and for the audience that is watching, thank you all for coming in, wanting to watch our videos. Thank you for the support. Thank you for everything. We really do appreciate it, and it wouldn't be this far without you guys. So thank you. And for those wondering, I met Garish from my hometown through studies, and I met Parag at my previous work. So I'm fortunate to know the both of you. And yeah, we will continue on here. So with the word like Indian itself, it's quite interesting because I think in the 1800s, late more so like 1900s, mid 1900s, the word Indian was mostly associated with Native American person, the Indigenous American, and now it's a little bit different because the Indian population has grown here in the United States to where both words Indian and Native American aren't really synonymous. Well, they are, but like it's different because you want to I know like certain Native Americans maybe want to be called Indian or something. That's fine, but I think that the people that I have met so far much prefer like Native American or Indigenous because like there's kind of maybe confusion when we think of who is Indian and who is not. Or yeah, not so much who is not, but who's Indian, like from which part of the earth, whether if that's in South Asia or like here or in the Americas. So yeah, I was curious, like with Native Americans being called Indian, do you guys also see that like maybe there is some like confusion into who is and who might not be?
I did because when I was filling few forms and it comes into the race category, I did see India, I did see Asia, and I thought, wow, we Indians are getting special privileges. We have separate box to pick off, right? But somehow my common sense said, no, there's Asia. So we ticked Asia, and I mean, but the story, the, we have been colonized for more than 250 years by Britishers. We got Portuguese, we got Dutch, we got French. Uh, the word India, just to delve a little bit into history, I don't know, but there's one treaty between Britishers and Spain. So they divided which part of the world to conquest. So all the western part was taken by Spain, and the eastern part is taken by Britishers, Portuguese. I think that's the story. So that's the reason you see South America taken by Spaniards, and we got East, we got Britishers and everything. And for you guys to be taken as native Indians is actually mistaken identity because Christopher Columbus was actually looking for India. So he thought he came to India when he reached America, and there's an entirely different story. But he thought he found a route to India, but that's not the scenario. There's another person called Vasco da Gama. He found a route to India. So that's the reason why, as you said, till 1940s, India was under the British control, colonial rule. We got freedom in 1947, and we are 1.3 billion people. So we obviously now we are being referred as Indians, but Native Americans were not. They don't associate with that time anymore. The word India, just to give a little bit of context, it's actually it's not India. It's actually Hindu. Hindu and India are very much related. So Hindu is actually a geographical term. So the word Hindu is like telling, hey, what your religion is. Hindu and Nebraska, think of that way. Those are geographical terms. You cannot associate it with the religion. So the word Hindu stands for the land between Himalayas and Indian Ocean. So our time, H has been lost, and it's India. And also Hindu means land of knowledge. So, and there's a lot of rich tradition there. So consequently, when we got freedom from British in 1947, so that's where I believe the relevance of Native Americans calling Indians is lost, and a new country, subcontinent has been given freedom. So I believe that's the reason why the Indians are called as Indians.
Yeah, thank you for that. I read, I was on Quora, and I always like type in my questions in Quora. It's an interesting website. And one of some person who like left a question is that like why Columbus, Italians, Spaniards, Europeans were at least somewhat familiar with who people from India were, right? So you would think that when they reached the Americas, they
Mhm.
clearly see a difference between people from India and
Mhm.
people that were there in the Americas.
Yeah.
But they still
So,
continued with the word, which is quite
Yeah,
interesting. Huh?
I just have something on that. Although I'm not a too much of a history geek in terms of the etymology of the word, but I think India, the term itself, I don't think it was really the native term to the land India. I mean, it was Hindustan. The original term was Hindustan. The whole area used to be called the Hind area. So I think India was more of a British and English version of for their convenience, for the British's convenience, I believe. I might be wrong, but from my understanding of history, the word India didn't really come into existence until modern history, until British really colonized us, because they started East India Company, and then the whole word out of convenience and out of really, it's easier to say India than East India. It's easier to say somebody messed up because they couldn't find the right land. So I mean, it just became more of a convenience thing than actually the history reference, in my opinion.
I was going to mention that in Spanish, if you look at the genealogical records and in the Spanish language, they would call Native Americans, they would call them indios, or, if it was a woman, it'd be India, a man, Indio. So that's just what they used. I think
uh,
it's kind of interesting too.
actually, that's right. I mean, just to add, India was actually not today. As we have demarcated boundaries. If at
Mm-hmm.
all you look at very ancient, just like 100 years ago, the map,
Mm-hmm.
the word Hindustan, Hindu means the land between Himalayas and Indian Ocean.
Right.
Stan is the location. The word Stan stands for location. It comprises India, the present India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, all the way
Mm-hmm.
to the west. All the way to the east, you have till I think it's Bangladesh, even Sri Lanka, and all the way you have till Vietnam. So the tradition or the culture or the practices extended all the way underneath that Russia.
Mm-hmm.
China, you have all the way. That's the reason you see big religions like Buddhism came all the way, Jainism. So,
Right.
I mean, it's called for birthplace of spirituality for a reason, but the spread has been so huge.
Yeah.
And I was pointing out when you colonize or when you go for a conquest, administrative purpose, the sole thing is divide and rule, which
Right.
is happening throughout the world under British Raj.
Mm-hmm.
And Joanna just said, actually, I was working with few Spanish researchers. So Mahabharat, let's say we have our own Game of Thrones, which is far, far sophisticated history, at least 5,000 years old. We do have a mention of a land which is in the current day Brazil or Spain, I believe. I don't remember. So we do have a reference of a particular location, which is the current day, and we do have a reference of those South American people saying that they came to help the native Indians, I mean, our Indians in the war. So we do have the reference. So we are connected, but I don't have all the proofs or evidences. But theory wise, yes, it makes a lot of sense.
Wow. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, Juan, were you going to say something?
I did have one question, which is okay. So I know for Mexicans, right, that Mexicans that are raised in the U.S., they're called Mexican Americans. Like, what do you guys have an equivalent term? Are you guys called like Indian Americans or?
The in a native slang, we call desis.
Mm-hmm.
Desh means a country. So since we're being raised in our informal language, call ourselves as desis.
Right.
But as you said, we call ourselves the Indian Americans, but that's going to bring a lot of trouble when filling applications and everything.
Right.
So we call ourselves just Indians, just to make
Yeah.
sure we're not. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Desias really encompass South Asia mainly. Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladesh, the old Hindustan, the Hindustan before partition, the more of a region than a country. It's I mean, it's easier. Not everybody is everybody's into culture, understanding the nuances of what India means or Indian American means. So it's easier to refer Indian Americans as Indian Americans, Pakistani Americans, Bangladeshi Americans than getting into what that actually means. I mean, personally, for me, if you ask me, call me Indian American, call me Desi American, call me American. I mean, I'm not tied up to just the term. I feel like it's more than just a term. I mean, any culture is more than just a term. It's easier to refer to that for the sake of convenience, I believe. But yeah, yeah, I'm not tied to just Indian American. Okay, that's my identity, if I
Okay.
can put it that way. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, we just, I mean, a lot of our own people just go by a lot. Like we just put a whole lot of stock in the actual label itself. We're so fixated on the labels. So interesting that to hear a different perspective on that.
Trust me, that got us into trouble. In our Hindu culture or Indian culture, we have these four lines. First thing we treat mom as a god.
Mm-hmm.
Second, we treat father as a god.
Mm-hmm.
Third, we treat teacher as a god. And the fourth, we treat any guest who comes to our house as a god.
Right.
So all the guests who came to India, Brits, Portuguese, Dutch, French, we did treat them, and guess what? They wouldn't leave the house, so they stayed for a long time because there's no such thing as identity, as you said yourself. There's because we believe in the whole world is your family. It's called Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The whole world is your family. You dissolve the boundaries. Only then you can coexist and you can commune. So, what Parag was pointing, that is a very ingrained in our culture. Like Indian can pretty much, you know, I'm not trying to say it as a trait, but that's as a part of our upbringing. So
Mm-hmm.
we're not as far as the adjustment. Adjustment you do trying to make some kind of concessions,
Right.
but you try to dissolve that identity. You coexist anywhere. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there is a lot of history there, but still, the personal identities are not that much for Indian people. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can relate pretty quickly with any culture. Uh,
Right.
so yeah.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting and what I learned at least a decade ago was like how the languages, someone from North India can't understand maybe someone from South India because the languages are so different. So
It is.
Yeah.
We got 2,000 languages, official
Mm-hmm.
are 29 languages. So for
Mm-hmm.
every street, you have a different dialect. But still, life goes by.
Right.
yeah, that's true. Life goes by, definitely. Um, yeah, it's really interesting, discussing about like the Indies. And
Right.
you have Indonesia as well, and then you have the Indies is in like the Caribbean islands and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So just like the labels that Christopher Columbus and his you know comrades wanted to put upon us as far as like being Indian and who is not, it definitely does create confusion because
Right.
like I think even when Spain had reached the Philippines, they called the people there Indios, which is Indians,
Hmm.
English, and also, if I'm not correct, it was that or Negrito, but I think they said Indio too.
Yeah, I think from the article we read on this channel, they did call them indios.
Yeah, so it's just
So as I was telling, the word Hindu or Indo is actually means knowledge, and I think will come later in our podcast. But most of the knowledge, just I'll try to make this point by telling you how when I say knowledge, how it's different from information. Information can be gained today on internet just by typing whatever you want. You can just gather data and everything. So when you say knowledge, it's basically knowing, right? So when you say you gather, you perceive through your five senses, or beyond your five senses, you try to perceive it. In India, there are temples, and misconception was temples are place of worship. It's not. Those are place of knowledge. So this is one temple in India that was built at least 800 to 900 years ago. It was built exactly at a location where the Tropic of Cancer and the equator coincide. And that's just one of the many temples. And how it was built, if you go by logic, there are no coordinates, there are no latitudes, longitudes, nothing was present. So that was considered as the Indian Standard Time, but during British conquest or uh, colonialism, they switched to Greenwich Meridian Time, which is standard for everything today. I think it's in 1881 or 1884. They moved it away. So that kind of knowledge you cannot go through logic. So anytime I open physics textbook, they would say, "Okay, let's start with light." My question is not how the entire concept has come, uh, step A to step Z. The point is, how did the researcher or a scientist come, or how did he discover it? Yeah. So if you look in India, all these folks, they don't have any logical explanation of expounding this knowledge. If you have ever heard of the word black hole, I think you heard it in 1950s or 1960s, and it's more popular in 1990s by Stephen Hawking. But in 1920, an Indian mathematician by the name Srinivas Ramanujan. If you saw the movie The Man Who Knew Infinity, so it's based on him. Is a real guy. He wrote an equation for black hole radiation in 1920, where there's no concept of black hole. So when you see this entire country, people call it Indos, is basically referring land of knowledgeable people. And so how did they perceive knowledge is another story, but they were knowledgeable people. That's all we know, because much of the mathematics, science, philosophy, yoga, even chess, martial arts came from those lands.
Yeah.
So there's a reason why they're called Indos. So I'm guessing that would be
Okay.
explanation. Yeah.
I'm always like, I had mentioned to my friends, like, if we could just trade with, if Native Americans could have traded with like two empires, two civilizations, because, one of the reasons is to, well, a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons why Native Americans, failed against, European, the British and the Spanish, was because we did not have the sufficient, weaponry, a lot of, goods that just were not available because Asia was on the other side of the Pacific, very, very far from the Americas. So anyway, I digress. I wish that like we could have traded with either China for like guns, gunpowder, and many, many other things, of course, or India because steel is from there also as well.
It is. And guess what? Actually, that would be a bad trade. I'll tell you why.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to hear. You guys take us over.
Uh, the word, I mean, just to tell you why, very, very similar, the Native American culture and Indian culture
Yeah,
goes back to the history, where I think it's at least some 1,000 years ago, not even 10, it's at least like 20, 30,000 years ago. The yoga has been given by first guru. When I say guru, he's the first person who gave yoga to seven people. We consider those seven people or seven disciples as seven sages. So after expounding yoga, we can go into details what yoga is. Not the hot yoga you see today or water yoga you see today. That's entirely different thing. He sent these seven people in seven directions of the world, and one went to Central Africa, one went to Central Asia, the other went to South America. So, and if you see in Greek, there's actually a temple called Baalbek. In Baalbek temple, you actually see lotus. Lotus actually found in India, in not somewhere in Mediterranean region. Doesn't grow there. And also you see the iconography of a particular ritual which is only found in India, nowhere else. And you see the same thing happening in Africa and South America. But when you said when the gunpowder came, when British and Europeans were very adept at making those weapons, even India was at mercy at their gunpowder. We did have what you call we did have those sophisticated weapons before,
Yeah.
but we fell at the superiority of the master slave game, the divide and rule. When you're fighting, as Lincoln says, a house divided itself against cannot stand. So they were able to successfully divide every place and everything. And unfortunately, much of the Native American culture is lost. Much of the Aboriginals from Australia and New Zealand is lost. The only consolation was India was able to preserve because I don't know how, but it was able to preserve that culture thousands of years later.
Yeah.
Conquest and conquest. I mean, we have British, Portuguese, Dutch, French. You even have Islamic conquests. Like, I mean, any person who stamps religion on it is a maniac. So it doesn't matter. If the conquest is just stamp God, it's gone. But yeah, India was able to somehow retain after thousands of years. That's the only consolation at the end we have.
Yeah, just back to one brief point about I feel the similarities between the term idios or indios, or I think it's like he rightfully mentions. I will say this, that the similarities between native and I mean indigenous people, Indians, American Indians, and Indian Americans, I feel the connection and the proximity to nature um, that keeps us. I think the best knowledge in the world, something that Girish referred to, the best knowledge is within you and close to nature. The more closer you are to nature, and I think that's the similarity, that's the similar thread you have in both kind of Indians, is how we learn from our experiments with the nature, and nature taught us so many things, and there are many species and races out there that continue to ignore nature, whereas I think the one thing that really um, helped both cultures and both races to thrive was their closeness. Because, for example, I mean, many things that when Americans, I mean, now Americans, I would say when immigrants came from Europe during the time of war, during persecution and stuff like that, religious persecutions, and they came in, they had little to no idea about how nature functions, at least in this part of the world. And there were many things that they picked up on, from Native Americans. Same goes for Britishers. There are many things that they found that they had no idea about. That, oh, okay, there are other things that you can. They had other knowledge, but in terms of, I think the common thread between Native Americans and Indians, and I mean, at least Hindustani people, is that spirituality, the closeness to nature, learning from experiments with nature and stuff like that, I believe.
That's an interesting point to look at. I think I wanted to add really quick, and thank you, Prague. The Garish was I think missiles also maybe they were developed in India or China, but I was reading about a colonial war between the British and the Indians, and that the Indians, some group in India had won this war, a small war, against the British because of the advancement of missiles. So I thought that was really interesting. It was in the 1800s, I believe.
It is true. I believe China did, I think, perfected the firepower using in rockets and everything. So what you're mentioning is actually
Rockets.
between Britishers, which is East India Company, against there's a particular ruler called Tipu Sultan. So he's from Mysore, from the state of Karnataka. So his father was actually a general in the King's Court, but he took over the throne and he established an entire dynasty. And his son was Tipu Sultan. And what he did was he perfected the art of launching these missiles loaded with gunpowder against Britishers. So he was able to defeat Britishers in 3 wars. Those are called as Anglo-Mysore Wars, Anglo referring to the Britishers. So he won 3, but he lost in the 4th, and that sealed the fate for him. But yeah, earliest proponents, and not only that, you'll be surprised how Iliad and Odyssey were considered as histories of Greek civilizations. Mahabharata is also a history of our civilization. In that history, or in that and the recorded events, they did mention about flying machines, and there's actually an entire book called Vimana. So Vimanam is flying machine, and they did actually go in very prescribed in very minute details, telling how to build. The material was not available because they don't know what's the exact name for those current materials, but it was the closest thing to flying saucer or flying machine. So we recently, I think, they found a book telling everything, but lack of interest, lack of aptitude to preserve Indian culture, we lost it. But substantial evidences were that use of missiles and rockets, especially nuclear. If you remember, Oppenheimer, who designated the first atomic bomb, actually utters the word from Gita. He says, "I now become death, the destroyer of the world." He actually quotes from a Hindu book called Gita. And the Mahabharata is actually 18 days of war that happened in a place called Kurukshetra. When they analyzed the soil samples, they actually found it as radiation. So that was around 5,000 years ago. The war has happened, and so missiles wise, that is the most theoretical explanation we have, but there's no proof. But we believe so missiles.
Yeah, Girish, on that point though, I'm sorry to interject, but how much of that is history versus mythology? I mean, there are amazing scriptures, and India is a land of scriptures. India is a land of all religions. All religions have come in, thrived, have all been eventually abandoned and eventually conquered. And there's a lot of stuff that happened over the course of centuries and decades and stuff like that. But I
Mhm.
just think that how much of that is actually mythology that we study as Hindu scriptures versus something like, I don't know. I mean, for example, a Bible would talk about various mythologies, various stories that may or may not have happened. How much of that is really a religious influence or religious scripture versus um, actual history? Because the modern history that we talk about, Mahabharata was 5,000 years ago, or if that's recent history or not, I'm not too sure. Ramayana, I grew up listening to. I mean, so there's a lot of overlap between religious mythology and history, which is there are many facts to it as well. There have been many evidences, but it's all mixed together, in my opinion. Like it's a vast history that I don't know how much of that is actual history versus mythology.
I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I would share the same opinion, Parag, what you're telling. Uh,
Hmm.
See, trying to understand India's history and India's roots of civilization, it's just beyond one's grasp.
Right.
Why I say that is, if you look any Abrahamic religions, take Christianity or take Islam, you have one central figure, you have one central Messiah,
Hmm.
you have one commandment.
Right.
You got end of the story. Either you have end of times or revelation or some second coming waiting for you.
Hmm.
You take a country like India. India never had any kind of boundaries. The key thing for to understand India, or at least Native American, why those are very really similar was you should know the difference between believing and knowing. Let me ask a quick question. Do you know you have a brain or do you believe you have a brain? So, or else let's put simple question. Do you know you have a hand or do you believe you have a hand? You know, because you can see. Basically, it comes to perception. You can see through your eyes, you can touch, you can feel. So basically, within your perception, or if it's your experience, you think you know. You only believe which you don't know, right? I believe you're a good person, or I believe stock market is going to crash tomorrow. So belief is something which you have not yet experienced, but you take a leap of trust or leap of faith, and you think, okay, I'm going to believe it. You wouldn't believe India is India is a land of not religions. India is a land of seeking. If you put this understanding, you take probably our friends from this. I mean, our American friends would know this, but if you go to a typical Indian home, Hindu home, you'll see a son worshipping a particular god, sister worshipping a particular god, mom worshipping a particular god, a dad worshipping a particular god. It's just an entire mess. If you're trying to find uniformity, you will never find it in Indian civilization. And if you're trying to find history and you're trying to understand mythology, you're trying to understand scriptures, it's really different because you cannot put or you cannot contain randomness. At the same time, because if everyone wants to go by commandment, it's easy. You don't have to question anything. You just take the commandment, you see through end of your life adhering to it. But once you believe that there are questions that cannot be answered out of a book or out of a commandment or out of a tablet, you have to go seeking it for yourself. And India is a land of multiple seekers. So coming back to answer, how do you separate mythologies from history? Well, history is always riddled with fantasies which we don't know, and you can't even consider them as scriptures. You have to take them as history. You cannot take Mahabharata, Ramayana, which are our equivalent, not equivalent, they're much more diverse, distinct compared to Iliad and Odyssey. You cannot consider them as scriptures. Scripture is giving you a certain teaching. If you look at all Indian scriptures, they never ever gave a commandment. There's always a debate. So they've written it in a very beautiful way. For example, there is Shiva, who we consider him as the yoga, uh, the first guru, Shiva. So when Shiva is giving yoga, his wife, the writers put his wife as a disciple, and she asked questions. Why do you think there are 112 ways? Why not more? Why not less? Why should I believe what you're telling is true? So it's always a dialogue. No one is given a commandment. And if you look in India, as you point out, you can't say Hinduism as a religion. We have Buddhism, we have Sikhism, we have Jainism. And in South, there are people who believe Shiva is a god. They believe Vishnu is a god. So we got all branches. So every time one philosopher comes,
Mm-hmm.
of people, hey, path is good for you. People found it reliable and reasonable. They would just shift it. Another generation, another person would come. He would say, you know what, that's not right. This is right, or this is much better way. That
Mm-hmm.
this makes sense. They would shift. So it's common sense, and whatever was relevant for the times,
Mm-hmm.
they took over it. So you cannot find common point, and you cannot thread them like a beautiful knitting cloth. You just have to deal with the randomness and soak in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you guys for sharing that. And
Yeah, definitely some really insightful information I had no idea about.
So
Mm-hmm.
sorry for throwing a lot at you guys, but that's what India is. And believe me, I did not pay that much attention. I have all these questions. I did not have that much of understanding until I came to United States. Two American people told me, "Hey, how come you not understand all this being in India?"
Mm-hmm.
That's a wake up call. Only when you are away from your mom and your motherland, you realize,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
And on that note, yeah, I agree with you, Girish. Rightly said. I think the predominant religion right now, at least at the moment, Hinduism in India, um, current strand of Hinduism that we're often hearing about in nowadays time, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, that idea of Hinduism is a rather more nationalistic, recent idea. which is kind of like blown out of proportion Hinduism idea. The idea of Hinduism, like the whole term Hindustan, that you know the Himalayas, the all that Hindland, anything below, like he rightfully mentioned, anything below Russia on that area. That idea of Hindustan was conceptualized by the religion Hinduism. So, right, but as he rightfully mentions, there is no set God, set religion, set belief system, set philosophy. It's more of a dialogue. I mean, I think the religion of Hinduism, from my understanding, especially the Hindu that I grew up with, is completely different than the Hinduism that Hindutva sort of that we currently hear about. So Hinduism is basically different strands and different thoughts encompassing an umbrella of dialogue. So when you talk of Hinduism, you don't really talk of someone wearing a tika. The actual Hinduism, from my understanding is someone who's open to many belief systems. Who does not talk about that doesn't talk evil of somebody else's belief system versus try to superiorize their own belief system. So it's more of an umbrella, more of a like a safe space for anybody, for any space belief system, which is more of a lost idea these days. Going by what's going on, so I feel like that religion is more not just a religion; it's just the way of life for many people at the time. So.
Uh, uh, if you look, for example, I mean, if you look at the word, I mean, you look at the Hinduism religion, there's no papacy, there's no prophet, there's no a kind of regulatory board, there's not even a commandment or any guiding principle. When you
Mm.
have randomness of cultural thing in going in a particular location, and see, I mean, I don't want to dwell a lot into politics and into how a democracy should work, since that's not the title of a podcast. But if you look at all the conquests, all the colonialism happened all over the world, the basic thing was the person in the charge, he feels that there's something else he needs to keep on conquering. Don't you think so? Be it from Alexander or Genghis Khan or anyone, it's his willingness to break the boundaries and go all the way. Don't you think once you have colonized Earth and if you have the technology to go to Mars, do you think they'll stop at Earth? They'll obviously go and colonize the other planet. It is that longingness to expand, to break the boundaries, no matter what, is what drives people to expand. And religion could be one thing, existentiality could be one thing. I mean, there are many, many religions who just, out of existential crisis, have to overcome, come out of their particular location, and they have to colonize or they have to go into conquest mode. So whatever you see today, though it doesn't describe the entire spectrum, because I have a small wound on my body. Okay, if the news channels keep on zooming on that particular wound and say, "Hey, Girish is totally unsafe," that is not the reality, right? So the lens, what lens matters there. That's not telling the entire story. So whatever you see today, um, Hinduism itself is a disorganized concept. Uh, so if you think there's Hindutva, it need not be. It's a localized thing. One politician thinks he needs to push his agenda, so it doesn't matter what he stamps on it for his agenda. It could be religion, it could be food, it could be human abuse. It could be anything. To further his agenda, if he mixes or brings his aspirations and stamps God on it, he don't have to worry. Because if I'm really, really honest to my conscience, if I do something wrong, my conscience would prick. But if I just stamp God said, God commanded me to do this, even tomorrow you do a massacre or you commit a genocide, you just throw it on the God and say, God is going to grant me a place in heaven. So we are in those times right now, unfortunately. So,
Yeah, thank you guys for you know giving us a really interesting topic to discuss. I think the audience is really interested in India as well. Yeah, I think as far as like Americans in general, I think our understanding of Indian culture is minute. That's the correct word to use.
I would say minute. It's because they only see what is shown to them. So if you turn on any major news channel and you see only those things, uh, they wouldn't describe the entire story, right? So if you're given a wrong map and you're trying to find out a particular location on a wrong map, obviously you're
Right.
you're in your wrong hands. So the thing is, I'll tell you the best thing of India. If you're happy, if you're feeling good, and your locality is good, good job. You don't have, they don't beat, or at least those people don't feel bothered to go to the world shopping. Hey, we're being good. Our life is extraordinarily good. But whereas today news channels, they require some kind of sensation going on. So
I'll give one example to what Girish is talking about. And absolutely, I mean, we shouldn't really blame Americans or anybody for um, not knowing what's happening in the east part of the world, especially if they don't have access to that kind of information. Nowadays, we do a little bit more than we used to. But when those things were happening, there was no social media, there was no internet, right? Whatever information that people have been able to transpire from one place to another is because of the advent of technology. But at the time, there was nothing like that. There was mainly hearsays, and nobody would go out there, cross all that, all those oceans, and 3,000, 4,000 miles, or even more. I mean, a lot more. So I mean, but one example that I can, which is very dear to me because that is basically my existence. Before part, there was a massive, even till this day, not many Americans would know about it because there's not much talk. There was Cold War going on at the time. We were just coming out of World War II, and we were just prepping up for another Cold War, something like that. So there was massive um, historical event that is still, even till this date, one of the largest human migration of the world. So between India and Pakistan, when they partitioned, millions of people were displaced. Um, they died. They were killed. There was a massive divide and conquer that Greece mentioned. So there's a historical event like that. It's, I mean, we all hear about Ukraine and Russia. We all hear about everything that's going on in Middle East. At the time, even till this date, there's not much that we know about. What happened at the time as Western culture. So I mean, since Hindustan was so massive, Britishers were successful to divide India among factions through religion. And we were Hindus at the time. My grandfather was one of them who was partitioned from his own land, which he really called India, and was asked to move from that particular location to come to Hindustan, which is more for Hindus. We were Hindus, we still are. So that's a huge example for personally for me that I found out that most of my American friends didn't know about, and that's so dear to me because that defines who I am. Because my grandfather was born in Pakistan. They had all their ancestors in current Pakistan, which was India back then. So that's something that I found very, very, very intriguing. I'm like, wow, this is a big chunk of history that most people didn't know about.
Yeah, thank you, Parag. Like I said, like India is just such a fascinating place to me. Like again, so diverse and so much more for us in the West to learn about as well. Um, but I think I wanted to maybe move a little bit through the script, and I think this question maybe is quite interesting. Is just like the view of maybe Native American people, indigenous people from an Indian perspective. I've always been curious about the outside world, outside of the United States, and what their thoughts are. Um, so maybe Gurish, maybe you want to go first, if you wouldn't mind.
sure, yeah. I mean, to be honest, there's not much awareness of Native Americans to Indians. It's only in the past couple of years this has started. The awareness of what uh, perhaps the most painful thing in American history or in the history of the world, especially when you claim yourself to be a forerunner of democracy and you say the pursuit of life is an alienable right, and you say a constitution is given to you, and a sitting president has ordered a mass extermination in a very, very, in a words that's beyond, that cannot be put, and still reverberates. It's only that if you're sensitive enough, you can feel that pain of that migration all the way across states to Oklahoma. I mean, that's just beyond understandable. But it also it also questions me after that exodus happened, the things that followed, how systematically Native American kids were taken and where systematically their culture has been constantly pulled out from their upbringing and terming Native Americans as savages. It's just beyond my understanding. I mean, the concept of administration, if at all you look at all the tribes of Lakota or anything, you got a chief, you got your general, you got your doctor, or whatever it is. There is a clear demarcation. Else not, you don't have a, without that kind of decentralized administration, your clan wouldn't exist. So what pains me or what really still I can't comprehend was how come the story was not told on a bigger screen all over the world when you're capturing very, very recent evidence, even killing a terrorist in Pakistan. It's a very big sensational thing. And you can't even try to capture that because the world has to know this. The world has to know that voluntarily giving away your lands, trying to be a true son of the soil. In fact, everyone is an immigrant until unless you're a Native American on this land. So when you are that passionately invested in this land, an exodus and a persecution has happened, that story when it's not told to the world, that's a huge, huge injustice. And second, apart from telling the story, the voice has to be heard very, very loudly. I don't see accurate, I mean, correct me, but I don't see much representation in public platforms or,
Right.
either government. I don't see that. I only came to
Mhm.
know about Native American culture and I was a little bit digging it up. It's because
Mhm.
of Guru's motorcycle ride. I think he drove around more than 10,000 miles, I believe. I think he drove more than 10,000 miles, covering all the native sacred lands. And I mean, if a person living in the United States and if I ask a fellow American what happened to Native Americans, they couldn't answer. I don't think a person living in Central Asia or India wouldn't have much chance until unless you are a researcher. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I would completely agree with Girish. Beautifully said. I think also he referred to something as another Indian, the way I looked, and him and I came around the same time to the US. For me personally, I found a political system set up in such a way that there can't be much representation. Because if you think about it, I'm sure demographically you can look up most of the Native Americans are somehow put in such a place by the government, not really uh, directly, but in such a way that it's hard to see or observe, in such a position that they can't get out of that spot. Is and it's been systematic. I mean, first of all, there's not much talk about them. So this is amazing platform. You guys are talking about this, and this is amazing. There's not much public, I would say, awareness outside of that microcosm, so to speak. Outside of that, there's not many people talking about them. There's not many people. Um, you know, uh, they are a minority. They are the most endangered minority, and we don't hear that on a louder scale as much as we should. So I just think that there's been systematic. downtroddenness that's been done on purpose. There's not much vote share that they have aside from their microcosm. So yeah, I think that's all I know because I don't know. They don't let us know, in my opinion. And who are they? I don't know. The system, I think.
I appreciate your feedback, Prague. That was awesome for you to say that. Yeah, there's some podcasts out there that really are trying to show that you know there are a lot more like indigenous people out there, Native American people out there than when one meets the eye and what's told in the news and what's told around the world. Despite the government's plans on trying to erase us, out of existence. And I'm not just talking about the United States government, but many governments, Canada's government as well, along with governments in South and Central America, which Juanchelo and I have covered somewhat extensively in previous videos. Honestly, no government is innocent here. So thank you, Parag. And then Garish, you made a really good point too, is that the previous president, I don't know which one, but like any president, are pushing for democracy, and yet we were forcing people to march all the way across the United States, Native American people from their homes all the way to Oklahoma. Many people died, but we still saw ourselves as a democracy. It's a very humiliating point, not point, but time of the United States. And there's just not too much, not many people know about that. Not as many people as in the world does not know about it as much. But Garish, I'm glad you knew about that, obviously, and Parag too. I think you're going to say something, Garish. Sorry.
Yeah, the Trail of Tears. I hope most of you guys know. Mostly native people should know this. When your people fell, when your old people fell during the journey, they did not leave them there. They carried them all the way to the final resting place, to their homes, and they gave a proper cremation or ritual, whatever it is. I mean, that shows that how obedient we are to the culture. And democracy need not responsible. I mean, democracy not necessarily is a good thing. And let me tell you why is that. Let's assume democracy goes by majority, right? The majority wins. So if there's a ship, on the ship, there's only one person who is capable of navigating the ship on a treacherous sea. But there's a mutiny. Five people, or the majority of the people, voted for a person who's not qualified to navigate a ship. So the captain was sitting out of the steering wheel, and guess what? The ship is going to sink. So democracy is not going to be any kind of impactful when it's not preceded by meritocracy. When it's a meritocracy, a person should be of enough merit, moral values, and some kind of understanding to feel the people's pain. In democracy, yes, 51% you get, you win. But it's also a job to understand the 49% people you're responsible for. So just because you're in a democracy doesn't give you the power to squash the persons or the people who did not vote for you. So, I mean, I didn't see much change from that image of leadership because honestly, I'm just wondering, at least a decent movie or decent Netflix series about the pain that Native Americans went through, the Trail of Tears, has to be told. Some kind of public outreach has to be done. At least a formal apology has to be given from a government, saying, "Hey, we have done wrong. Forgive us. Let's not be bitterful about the past. Let's move ahead."
They
If
do
there
that
is
every year, Girish. They do that with Thanksgiving. Such a mockery.
So that kind of optics needs to be shown or come from a high level of government. And because, I mean, you guys are making an effort to share the stories of indigenous people. how many people do really know that they're indigenous at the first place? Like many people have been given it adoption homes, foster care.
Mm-hmm.
So those stories are lost. And
Yeah.
the sad thing about Native American people is there's no stored or written history. It's all through oral culture. It's a good thing, to be honest. It's a very good thing, but it's lost. So yeah, that's a sad thing.
I think what you said, Bruce, is an excellent transition into our third part, and in knowing like how do you know if you're even indigenous or not, or native or not, um, and that kind of goes straight into the caste system.
Mm-hmm.
Now, India's caste system, I think, is quite different than it was bestowed upon Indians from the British, if I'm not correct.
I think I have to educate here most of my Indian folks. Majority, I would say majority of the Indian folks have no clue what this caste system is. That
Okay.
would even include my family members and my relatives. They
Mm-hmm.
don't even have a clue. The word caste is actually a Spanish word, come from casta, and it refers to lineage of race.
Mm-hmm.
I would challenge if any person or Indian person, if at all, who's watching this podcast, to find a single word caste in any written history or scripture, anything, because there's no such thing. It's just a clever, very clever ploy by British Governor Lord Macaulay. So,
Mm-hmm.
in his very, very infamous speech to the British Parliament, he did say these three things because they have success with New Zealand, they have success with Australia, they have success with United States, America. They were able to break every indigenous culture. When it came to India, they were unable to break. And Lord Macaulay said, these are the three things which we need to break in order to make sure we conquer India. Because India is one huge chunk. You cannot, a battalion of East India Company soldiers cannot run it. The only way an Indian person would listen is an Indian governing them. So he said three things has to be broken down in India to establish our conquest. So one is a spiritual process. Second is its family system. And third, spiritual process, family, and third is its temples. So if we break all these three, I think we can establish our superiority or we can establish our roles in India subcontinent. So that's when because in India, or at least in the land of in the land of India, arts were transmitted through family. Family, for example, anytime a boy and a girl wants to marry in India, the families would ask them, "Tell me your 12 generations of your family." So they have to recount their entire family ancestral tree. They would look for traces of any kind of particular disease. So if there's a disease, there's a chance that that disease can be transmitted down the genealogical tree. So they would just say, "Hey, sorry, we wouldn't do this." And since crafts are being transmitted through families, for example, much of Central Asia, Europe were actually flooded with Indian textiles. You ever heard of sari? I think a lot of Indian women have seen they wear a traditional Indian style. It's called sari. Uh, Imagine a matchbox to light a cigar, and imagine entire sari, which is almost like 10, 15 feet cloth. It was woven so thin that it can be put it inside a matchbox. It was that highest quality of textile. So these kind of craft are always transmitted through family because in a family you have kids and the kids you transmit the knowledge and skills. Unlike today where we're all going to college, university, or mass produced, you're mass manufactured, you're thrown into market. You don't know, you obviously know that what you read is nowhere relevant to what you're doing today. So the arts are always given uh, through families. Imagine I have a goldsmith daughter. Goldsmith deals with very fine crafting, right? It's a very subtle thing. You have to draw, you have to work in very, very light. Opposite, you have a blacksmith who works in very heavy metal. He keeps cutting, keeps chopping. So one is soft, delicate, the other one is tough, hard. Now, if I give my daughter to a blacksmith family, I don't think my daughter would have a good life accommodating there because she is built in a very soft manner. Opposite is true. So that ways they maintain distinction. There's no discrimination. There's a distinction, but there's no discrimination. And
Uh, I agree
again,
with you, Girish. I'm sorry to interject. Agree
yeah,
mostly with your analysis, and that very well true. That shows that there were some good elements, there were some positive things that came out of it because it was a great system in place. It was a great lineage system. And to add to that lineage part, I think it was a great professional system as well, something that he referred to, that there wasn't much. It was more of a vocational training in itself within the family. You have business family, you have blacksmith, goldsmith, stuff like that. It stayed there. The art stayed there. The profession stayed there. Profession stayed there. I think the one point where I may contend a little bit in the sense that it was such a system is ready to be exploited. If
it
you
is.
don't,
It is. Yeah.
it's sort of if someone comes in, sees this loophole, sort of, because if you're born in an upper caste, if you're born in a good caste, if you're lucky, you'll stay there that way. If you're born in a king caste, you'll stay that way. That's amazing. You will live your happily life ever after. You'll marry someone ready for you. Everything is set for you. You really don't have to worry about. You just have to follow the path, basically. God forbids if you're born into something lower,
I
your
mean,
entire
that's what I'm trying to tell you, Parag. When you say
right.
lower upper, there's no distinction of lower and upper over
Yeah,
there.
yeah, there is apparently. If you do,
So,
I know that there
so
is no caste wording in our scriptures, but there is varna. We've all heard of varna. So
when you say
varna
yeah,
Varnas were defined like a pillar. So I mean, I'm not saying it was done in that regard. Every it was more of an Aristotle philosophy that every man or every woman who was born in the world had a purpose. So as Aristotle from back in the days philosophy, he also referred to something like that, where there is a purpose. A blacksmith can serve a blacksmith's purpose. A king can serve a king. There's a very weird way to look at that, but of course everybody had a purpose. So caste system in a way um, kind of was an
when
element from that philosophy, in my opinion.
no, not necessarily true. I'll tell you why. So when you say varna, just
Hmm.
when you say varna, it means quality, right?
Right.
So just to let guys giving a little bit context here, Parag was telling us that though the arts were transmitting through family tree, still there is there might be a discrimination because you if you're born into a blacksmith family, you cannot go ahead and marry a girl of that's not based on caste system. So in India, when you say varna, which is the very essential hierarchical thing, it means quality. For example, let's say that I'm a very timid guy. All of a sudden, I has to lead an army. Do you think I'm the right fit? I don't think I'm the right fit. So my quality of timidness is not the right fit to that particular situation. So in India, when they mentioned Varna system. So this Varna system is actually so, we all call ourselves as humans, right? So the very interesting thing was the word human or manu refers to people, and we in India have a book called Manusmriti or Manu. So Manu is the first person who codified a law. So it's considered the first legal document in thousands of years ago. So this first legal document. So in that he says that there are four varnas. So there's Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra. So Marcus, to answer your answer for the caste system was introduced by British, but the existing system is called Varna system.
Hmm.
So Varnas is where you have Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra. So Sudra is the lowest person. When it's the lowest person, the lowest person is a person not based on birth, but based on his quality. When you're no good to society, when you don't work for the benefit of the society or well wishing to society, you're considered the lowest person. It doesn't matter you're black, it doesn't matter you're white, it doesn't matter you're tall or short. If you don't serve the purpose of a society, well benefit of society, you're considered Shudra, that is your outcast. You are not good for your home or not good for the village, you better stay away from us. Vaishyas, though the profession was trading, Vaishya is the one who engages in day-to-day business. It means I am running the country's economy. I'm doing my job. Sometimes I have to take tough decisions, but I know the art of trade. I'll do the trade. Come Kshatriya. Kshatriya is the one who puts himself in the line of fire.
Mhm.
It means that if there is an invasion coming on,
Mhm.
forget about my well-being. My well-being is for the people. I'm going to put myself before. So if you see a person is progressing from, hey, I'm now good for the society, to I am good for the society, to I am protecting the society, then there's higher most one, it's called Brahman. Brahman itself means the entire universe. A person who realizes that he and the universe are one, that is the highest varna. So in Manusmriti, the first codified book, he says any person with rigorous work, you can transmute from one varna to another varna, one quality to another quality. Well, Brits played a different game. So we have caste system which is plaguing us since 150 years, and I don't see any end pretty quick. So Parag, but just that is the right way to see varna. But
Right.
when you have people understanding
Yeah. No,
understand the
you're right.
difference between varna
You're
and
spot
caste,
on.
we have a lot of problems.
Right. Because that philosophy is amazing. It's transferable. The fact that the different varnas are transferable, you can, if you can even go from, Shudra to even Brahman if you desire, if you so desire. But when that philosophy doesn't always translate into real life. So I think, yeah, that's where the problem came from, the whole caste system.
Yeah, I mean there is mentions. There are
Mhm.
many kings who understood that this is not what they want to do. Through intense meditation, they became enlightened. But
Right.
that was for another day. I don't want
For
to take
sure.
my script. So
Mhm.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. I knew this conversation would be very good because we're way
Yeah.
over an hour. Um,
sorry for dragging it long, but
no,
without that,
Oh yeah, no, it's a good episode. I was just gonna say, like, I have one friend that I used to text with a lot over years. And her name was Swati, and she lives over in India, right? Like, I believe she lived in Delhi for a long time,
Oh,
but
nice.
she commented about somewhat a little bit about the caste system. She was saying that sometimes, when she's trying to date another guy, that her dad will sometimes interject and say, like, maybe speak badly about the guy and say, well, he's from this and this caste or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but he says it in like a negative way. So I just
Mhm.
thought,
well, in India, we take the teachings of Jesus very seriously. Love your neighbor as thyself. So neighbors make a lot of decisions for us. So
The
if
neighbors,
you're
yeah.
married, you need to have you need to have consent of not only your family but all your relatives.
Extended neighbors, family.
So,
So
so the
yeah.
caste, so they believe they all belong to caste. I have never seen it on my body or anywhere, so I don't know where it is. So,
No, I mean, I believe that. I mean, Swati might have faced that, might face the entire life, because I mean, it's a very, especially like I said, if that, it's a very, very, very demanding system that it's very hard to, even till this date, if we're very modernized, there's not that much, especially in a place like New Delhi. I'm a little surprised. New Delhi is a lot more modernized, but like Girish rightfully mentions, it's not just your own family. You actually worry about your extended family, which also includes your neighbors. So I mean, that's where it's more of a societal taboo. Her dad might not very well have any problem, but the fear of the societal taboo, what they might think, is what is half the problem, I should say.
I'm really learning a lot here about caste systems and whatnot, and it's
yeah,
really intricate. I think Garish, you had brought up earlier in the very beginning of the podcast, like how indigenous people, Native Americans, especially in the north part, were very much. I mean, I guess you could say we were wiped out. A lot of the population was, and in Australia too. But India, despite being invaded by the British and many other European countries as well, are 1.3, 1.4 billion people. It's quite a lot. So was not as affected. Um, of course, we can go into the depth of topics of like, indigenous people and those that are non-traditional, such as myself,
Hmm.
reconnecting, be tribalized. But the point that I want to get is that, when Europeans, specifically the British and the Spanish, came here, I'm sure you're all aware of that. Many, indigenous people did not have the type of defense against the diseases that they brought. Um, the British, if I'm not correct, even used biological warfare in terms of the blankets that they gave to Native Americans in the North. Um, Now, someone would possibly want to debunk that or tell me that's not true. Sure, go ahead. But from what I understand, what I was told, and what I've read, I believe that is true. Um, so that being said, indigenous people also did not have any like connections to. I mean, well, they did have one small connection to, I think, a Polynesian island where they're trading. Um, but in terms of like having to the old world, as they say, especially in Asia and Europe, um, was not there, unfortunately. Where India, it was right next to China and many other like great empires as well. So I think that would be the reason as to why, indigenous people did not fare as well. Again, we can get into the caste system in terms of like, who's indigenous, who's native. The Spaniards created the term mestizo to say,
Hmm.
again, a ridiculous term to me, that anyone that has like European Spanish, DNA is considered like mixed. But again, it's quite silly because, there's many Native Americans here in the United States that also have that, but they're not called mestizos. But of course, if you go into
Right.
Canada, um, there's a group of, I forgot what the tribe was called. It starts with an M.
Meti, I think.
Yeah, Métis.
We're probably
But
butchering it, but yeah.
yeah, but anyway, um, so it's just it's interesting to compare like how colonialism did affect us. Um, between
Yeah.
thank you, Will, for the
One
comment.
quick point on that, Marcus.
Sure.
You're spot on there. I think there's one more qualification that I would add on in terms of what Indians were fortunate to not be, for some reason, not be as together in terms of their unified culture that we briefly talked about earlier in the podcast. There was no sort of uniformity. So that disadvantage, sort of, because it was hard for us to be united for one reason, right? Because there was different culture, there was different language, right? Of course, we proclaim to be united in diversity and stuff like that. So I think what a bigger challenge for Britishers or for anyone colonizing India was, how do you divide them when they're already divided with different things, like divided in materialistic things, for example, language, right? So when they came here in Native American culture, the big crux of it was similar. So I feel like there was a fortunate and unfortunate challenge right there for East Indian East India Company to try and dividing different cultures into different pockets, because it's not easy for you to do. So I feel like that was one of the reason that they were not able to divide us for that long. But here they had some success because of, unfortunately, the culture was rather more united in Native American.
If to add our the reason why they have success across all other indigenous cultures and relative less success with Indian,
Hmm.
the transmission of knowledge, not just oral transmission. The transmission of knowledge happened from a guru to disciple. When it's a guru, it's a master, it's a live master. He know ins and out of an transmission. So let's say, for example, I take a flower, or else I take a human. I know that human is perfectly alive. If I cut him and try to look where he's inside a body, I cannot see him. So those subtle details of understanding of within and the tradition of transmitting that knowledge all the way uh, through generations of family to discipleship and That's one way we preserve the culture. The only way to eradicate that culture is to wipe out entire indigenous or natives of that particular land, which unfortunately happened. Which unfortunately happened in Native Americans, which unfortunately happened in Aboriginals in Australia. Like, at least I know there's a thriving community here, but in Australia, I am not. I mean, I'm not denying it, but I barely hear it. Uh, New Zealand a little bit, but when you go with that kind of iron footing, with the determination to wipe them out, the knowledge is definitely lost, and not per se rituals. For example, one of the saddest thing I keep hearing is how Matotipla is referred as Devil's Mountain. Like, what is your historical basis? What is the reason you're calling it Devil's Mountain? But the significance was, I think, not even Native Americans understood, but only when Sadhguru came, he told why it's such an important place, not on North America, but in the entire world. It's such a huge, phenomenal place. And those places of learning, we don't know how many were lost because without a guided master or at least a person from the existing culture, uh, it's hard to know. And I believe, or correct me, are there any kind of written historical records about Native American cultures, or is it all gone during?
Yeah. So in terms of like historical records made by indigenous native people, a lot of the culture, like the language was very much like oral. Now there were like, if I'm not correct, hieroglyphics, like wording from the Mayan culture, which is in Guatemala, southern Mexico, Central America. Um,
Yeah, and I believe the Mexica had some sort of codexes too, but a lot of those were burned.
Got
yeah.
you. And most of the secrets are just lost, right? And
Yes.
not anyone, because in the name of modernization, you make the existing people ashamed of your past. I don't think that led any continuity. But in India, it is ingrained so deep into the culture. Like, I used to cough at my parents anytime there's a death in my family. We used to isolate, not isolate. We should not be touching. We should not be going out for 14 days. Can you believe that? Imagine you're a small kid. All your friends are playing in the playground, and the person has died in your family. You sit in the home and you just keep wondering, why the hell I'm sitting here? Someone has died. It's 1 week ago, 2 weeks ago. Why don't you let? But there's a concept of quarantine. There's a concept of quarantine, and we use turmeric in very rudimentary way, which is a very good antiseptic, and that is what attracted Europeans and other invading colonialists, because they look for spices, they look for metals. Till the diamond mine was discovered in Kimberley, South Africa, India was the only supplier of medicine. I mean, diamonds. The diamond you see on British Her Majesty throne or crown, it's the diamond which came from my hometown. So a lot of has been looted. They're only able to loot material. Uh, Fortunately, uh, few people went into hiding. They very secretly transmitted this knowledge, because this knowledge cannot be transmitted orally. A parrot can transmit or can parrot, repeat continuously, but
Mm.
knowledge has to transmit through a live process, so that it is going to generation after generation, so that there's no distortion in the knowledge. That fulfillment of entire process, which we call as yogic process, uh, fortunately, or I don't know, it happened in India. So the uh, entire secrets of the universe were unraveled there. It only takes a matter of willing, for you and effort to understand those. So we're glad at least some of it was left after thousands of years of not just colonialism. We even have Islamic invasions. In Islamic invasions, I mean, India is a country where you have all the religions. I mean, it's a like mini UNO, United Nations. People just complain about intolerability. I find it ridiculous, but it has been home for lands of multiple religions.
Yeah. And that's what makes India really interesting because so many religions make up the country. Um, I think one thing that I don't want to spend too much time on colonialism because we're getting into an hour 20. One of my questions I always pondered on, which was with the reason why many the Aztec Empire, the Mayans, unfortunately succumbed to Spanish rule, was that it wasn't so much the Spaniards and their weapons, but more so was their allies, native allies that joined them, or through force, willingly or forcefully. Now, I've watched one Indian movie. It was called Mangalpandi, where I learned some things about colonialism, and how life was during British rule. I've read many articles about India's history, specifically colonialism, and there are many rebellions. And
Mm-hmm.
I like to believe that it wasn't just Grish or Parag, one of you had said that it was gunpowder that played a large role for the British in their success in the initial startups of the, I guess you could say, take over or rule colonialism. And so during these rebellions, the British won. Were they successful because uh, um, it wasn't weaponry alone? Did they have other people in India that sided with them as well, very similar to the South American continent where many empires fell because of other native allies too?
It is very, very strikingly similar, Marcos. Uh, when I was going through Indian history, my blood just boiled. Because how can my own people can't even oust a foreigner, but you side with the other person? Because as I was telling you, in order to gain foothold, one thing was you establish yourself as a superior. The moment you have gunpowder and you show yourself as superior, no matter how subjugated you are, you believe them to be the great or the greater good. I mean, this is what it happens. The moment you have a bigger weapon, you are bound to subjugate, or you are bound to offer yourself to that person and believe he is good or great. So, as we talk, a fun fact in India, the Britishers don't want to leave. The World War was done in 1945. Now they have a huge task of restoration of their empire because they were just spent trying to defeat Germany, and America became very powerful. In order to counter America, they want India again to deplete each and every resource to build them up. In fact, Hong Kong was not free until 1997. Remember, so they don't want to give up the colonies that easily. Especially India. India is the crown jewel in the entire empire. On the sun which never set, India is a shining sun for them. So a mutiny broke out in 1946. August is when we had the World War end. In I think it's in January or February. There's a mutiny that broke out. There's a naval mutiny, and that mutiny spread all across India. Only then Britishers thought, okay, time is up. We cannot play any more games. We got to leave, and they left in a hurry. And we got freedom in a hurry. That's not a very proud way to say. But coming back to your question, when this mutiny arose, it's one Indian ruler who's looking to consolidate power would seek the help of Britishers to, you know, crush those mutinies. I mean, this happened. The Mangal Pandey, which you're talking, it's called the First War of Independence. It happened the year 1857. That's almost 90 years before India's independence. You wouldn't believe the words exactly told by Britishers. Had it not been the help of Indian rulers, we would have packed our bags and been in British the next day.
Yeah.
So they had a very systematic play. They pitted one people against another. They waited till the weakest fell, till they had the strongest. Then they took over him, put a puppet, and ruled over. So they had a very systematic approach of brainwashing Indians to a horrific thing that the most saddest thing in entire Indian history is not Indian history, but in the Indian freedom struggle is a event called Jallianwala Bagh. This is actually the name of a particular location in Punjab.
Amritsar. Yeah. Mhm.
So a peaceful gathering because Gandhi was propagating non-violence, and a peaceful crowd has been sitting in a park. The park has only one narrow entrance. So there's this particular general called General Dyer. He
Mhm.
took a small mini tank. He took a battalion of his soldiers, all Indian soldiers, by the way. There's only one white guy who's leading this battalion. This is General Dyer. He ordered all the battalion to continuously fire, keep on firing on their fellow Indians until everyone is dropped dead. Many people jumped into the well. Many women with their babies hugging to their chest jumped in the well to save, but the well is too deep and they died. In fact, General Dyer said, I ran out of bullets. I want to make sure that killed thrice. He said this proudly before British Parliament. And you must understand what kind of brainwashing a colonialist or a subjugator would go to inflict this, make one person your inflict on a fellow person, fellow Indian. So it's a horrific thing. We should not be bitter because we should not forget it. Forget only fool forgets,
Right.
and most foolish person will build resentment. But we should not forget. We should not forget how we are pitted one against another. At the same time, building resentment is not the right thing to do.
And if you go there to that site, there's still you can still see the bullets, like
Lodged into
mark.
the walls. Yeah.
It's happened in 1919. You go there, you can feel the reverberations are still there. And yeah, Bhagat Singh. I think that event actually was. I think one of the yeah that also lit the fire even more. I mean, since then it was inevitable. Of course, like he rightfully mentions, Girish does. They more it was more out of necessity. They had to pretty much flee the land. But after that incident, it was going to be inevitable that there's going to be a big outcry, which also happened. Yeah.
I think one
Yeah.
of my favorite parts of Indian history, and this is the hypocrisy of the West,
Mhm.
certain countries in the West, I will say,
Mhm.
is that when Goa, I believe it was a Portuguese colony, and if I'm not correct, maybe India warned them that they were taking back, that land, and
Mhm.
Portugal and India went to war, and I believe Portugal lost badly, and then they like complained and cried that India was so mean to them, and then they got all the West to be like, "Oh, India, you're so bad," but the Indian government was reclaiming land that was stolen from them.
So
So this is the hypocrisy that many countries that colonized much of the world is. Anyway, sorry, Greece, you can say something.
no, as you said, it's right because still the West is in colonial hangover. They still feel they're the masters, but the relevance is gone. The Goa, so British, true to its uh, Playmaster book, at the time of leaving, uh, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, it's all one big continent. It said, hey, all the free kingdoms, all the rulers, you're free to do whatever you want. Either you can join India or you can join Pakistan or you can do whatever you want. And already there's an aspirationist Muslim League which is trying to carve a separate country, and we have another separation. I mean, we have a lot of separatist movements happening within the country. The first thing was let's get rid of Britishers, then we can worry about joining our territories together. So one man on his mission, he united 585 states. On 585 states, three states said, okay, we will let you know later. So one was Hyderabad, which is my hometown. The other one was Jammu Kashmir. The third one was Goa. Goa became part of India only in the year 1961. And as you said, Marcus, when India military was authorized to take back I mean, Portugal actually raised this at United Nations and Security Council. They wanted to send UN troops to defend that colony. Goa is actually within the mainland of India. I mean, how could they still believe after World War is done, almost 20 years later, you still believe that, or 16 years later, 20 years later, you still believe that you are master. I mean, they're still in that colonial hangover. They still feel, I mean, the statements they throw sometimes the Western countries towards these colonies. I mean, I still don't understand why we have a Commonwealth nation when all the wealth is plundered. I don't know what are they trying to do. As Trevor Noah would say, give bits of gram in gold medals, which is 9% gold and 91% silver. So I don't know what commonwealth do we really have to share when they looted everything. India was a cash cow. They looted $45 trillion, and uh, yeah, they're still in colonial hangover.
And I think it's funny because Portugal was barking like a small little chihuahua compared to, and you're comparing that to like India, which is like a giant, like Great Dane Mastiff. And this little chihuahua still thought that they owned this big dog, or
Uh,
they,
yeah, I mean, lessons were not learned, Marcus. If you see, we got freedom in 1947. What are we doing 14 years later, still not reclaiming the land, which is an integral part of your country? And people still feel that somehow British have done very good part colonizing. This is the colonial hangover. This happens when you don't have any clear idea of your culture, you have any clear idea of what your country means or what your ancestors meant. But that's a sad story of almost every colonized country and every wiped out native cultures.
hmm. Yeah, and I think it really goes back to the other kind of final part of the colonialism is shared suffering. You know, having like seeing the natives fighting natives that the Spaniards had used in the divide and conquer method, very similar to the British in a lot of ways. Um, I'm not sure if the Portuguese did that too. I actually would be curious how many Indians fought for the Portuguese during that battle, because Portugal's population is quite small already, and back then it was even smaller. Honestly, like, well, how they acquired Brazil was the natives in Brazil were unfortunately not didn't have any weaponry in terms of like at least the Aztecs. Mexica had macahuites, which is like this somewhat sort of like a sword, a powerful weapon. Anyway, again, I digress too much. Yeah, I'd be curious, like how many Indians did maybe would were on the side
So
of Portugal.
I was not aware of Portugal, the exact figures, but when the Allies were fighting against the Axis forces, that is Germany, the Nazi Hitler Germany, a record 1.5 million people, Indian soldiers, without even given adequate clothing in harsh winters. Of all regiments all over the country, they fought on behalf of Britishers. So not only that, I mean, you must understand there's a severe famine in Bengal, which is on the west side of the India. People were dying like flies. When you have a million people died within a span of a couple of weeks, the Governor Generals wrote to British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Today, Britishers believe, oh, he is the one who stood against Nazi Germany. Similar attempts has to be done to Putin. So people wrote saying, please release those reserved storage of wheats. People are dying like flies, and the famine is struck. We need those food rations. He said, no, those rations are required for British soldiers during World War II. And they said, you don't understand the situation here. It's very, very desperate. Then he very sarcastic wrote, why did Gandhi not die yet? So the amount of contribution from Indian regiments that went all the way to fight in Nazi Germany against Nazi Germany was so huge. The deaths were so huge. There's a lot of not just in terms of manpower, gunpowder, textiles, uh, everything. There's a huge number of what you call materials that are given as a part of war preparations. At the end, there's still grudgingly left. I still today don't understand. When United Nations was found today, what you see the Permanent Five Security Council, You have USA, you have Russia, you have USA, Russia, Britain, France, China. I still don't understand if they're all victors of World War II, how come India is not part of the Security Council? And today, the five, the big five. I mean, that's a very insider talk. Like whatever the agenda, they always make sure it works. So so much for geopolitics and big what do you call big leaders.
Yeah, I never thought of that. Like how many Indians fought over in Europe during World War II. Like, yeah.
There is this wonderful video by Shashi Tharoor giving about how why Britain owes reparation to India. So I think it's a wonderful video. You should see it sometime.
Sorry, what's it called again?
It's Shashi Tharoor. You can say Britain owes reparations to India. You can type that,
Okay.
and you see how a Indian politician in an Oxford debate actually, yeah, he demolishes Britain's colonial mindset. So,
Yeah, I would like to see that. Thank you.
sure,
Now, Parag unfortunately had to go. It is quite late. So I think we'll try and speed this up and
sure.
oh, many thanks, Sam, for joining. But we'll try and speed this up and finish this off. One other little piece of the colonialism aspect was just like 21st century, post-colonialism on India. We talked about the caste system. Do you feel that? I mean, certainly there are other things that you see that are still lingering in India that very much resembles the colonial past. What would you say is the one main thing that you see um, that really affects Indians negatively?
There's still the caste system still there. It's a very big issue. Uh, I mean, there's several things that right now which I don't want to digress into that. There are multiple reservations for this oppressed caste people. There are multiple reservations, hoping that it would help them come out of economic burdens and progress quickly. So in India, 49% of the government jobs are given for economically backward reserved caste people. That is being a point of contention for people who don't have any reservations, who believe they're born in upper caste, which is a direct violation of fundamental rights. But you know, politicians always play this card because it was mandated to be only for like 10, 15 years. We are now 75th year of Indian anniversary. We are in silver jubilee of the freedom, I mean, Independence Day, but still we haven't got rid of it. That's the reason you see all the top talent migrated from India. They're here. Barring Apple, all the top companies are barring Apple and Amazon, those two biggest, Google, Adobe, HP, all the top are Indian CEOs. So because they were denied those opportunities back in India, they came here. They are now flourishing very well here. So reservation is one manifestation of that caste system. Now, a very huge divisive thing in India, and still in remote villages, the practice of untouchability still exists. Not many people knew this. Untouchability is regarded as a sin. It's a direct violation of constitution and in many laws. Still, people don't, or the police doesn't enforce it. You have a very major police force, which is reminiscent of British colonial system, which are in huge dire need of modifications. But still, this untouchability, this exploitation, because of this illiteracy. 600 million people can't even afford 2 days, 2 meals a day. That's the situation in India right now. And I mean, this all comes, is all like interlinked. Because you're born in a certain caste, you're denied certain economic opportunities. Just because you're born in caste, since your mother and father work for a particular landlord, you're supposed to keep working. So this is the mindset. Again, I'm just trying to not tell you that's the entire picture, but these are like spy cases in the remnants of that colonial manifestations in the current times. Sad because there's 1.2 billion people more than 50% is below the age of 40, which is huge potential to be a superpower, economic superpower, and also be a spiritual beacon for the world. But caste system and other things is holding us back.
I like to have hope for the future and believe things will
It
improve
is.
in time. Um, you know, I wanted to bring up one little point. We were talking about like Indians having to go to fight other people's wars. Something that I thought was interesting was I read a lot about the China, the Opium War between the
Mhm.
Chinese and the British, and how Hong Kong essentially was acquired, stolen, taken over, um, and the military, the British military, over at least half of the British military was made up of Indian
It is.
soldiers, probably over half, but it's just really fascinating how much Indian contributed to British military success, even economic success too.
The worst part was when independence was acquired, India and Pakistan were by partitioned. The top military generals were still Britishers. The sitting British commanding officer in Indian bureaucracy, getting each and every information about India and passing it to the Buckingham Palace. And I can only wonder what's the mindset of the politician who sat as a prime minister. How can you have an existing or previous colonial master still in midst of us? And even the first commander in chief of India Army post independence was not an Indian guy; it's a British guy. So was the same with Pakistanis too, because the top posts were taken by the British people. All the lower ranks were given by, or at least maintained by the Indian people. So the Brits again, uh, how do uh, they are the ones with the snake sitting with the crown on it, and trying to play the entire to the tune of the situations. But yeah, the tail we bore the back of the we bore the burden on our back and broke our backs uh, patiently. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Garish, for answering that. Yeah, the Indian people really did so much for you know the West, specifically British. Now, I believe Gabby had a question. Would it be possible to ask her questions from the chat in a quick fire away, Marcus? Yeah, because I know like some people are going to bed, so we can't answer some questions right now. And I believe so. If y'all want to like shoot your questions, please do. And I think I'll read this one here, which was from Neil, which was, does India practice colorism, and if so, is it attributed to colonialism? So like lighter skin, probably Indians.
hey Nelly, thank you for asking the question. Yes, it is because in India, if you look at the Indian map, you see North India is landlocked. India, you have sea all over from three directions. And people are obviously have dark skin the more you approach to the Indian Ocean. And the Britishers with pure white, they literally whitewashed and they told people of white skin are superior. And that is actually a trait of their colonial propaganda. And it is our ineffectiveness to counter that because color has nothing to do with your character. At the end of the day, it's a character that counts, not your color or I, it's interesting why I don't know why they keep calling other people's colored when a white, or at least not just trying to call white people, but white people change pretty much in all weather conditions, right? So if you sneeze, you become red. If you go brown, you become blue. But that is the prejudice they had, or there's a prejudice they spread, saying all dark colored people are lowest form of race. All the white colored people who descend from Buckingham Palace or Britons, they are the superiors. And unfortunately, it was still practiced till today. Despite how much I try to convince myself, I still see that people go for fair skin. all the marketing products were geared towards fair skin. It's only in last year a law has been passed saying that from this day onwards, no products with fair skin advertisement will be displayed in ads. So, but still, it's relevant. It needs a major mindset. It's not the color of the skin; it's the character of the person that makes count.
Yeah. Thank you, Girish, for answering that question. That's a really good point to take. Um, I think someone else had another question regarding the French and just like if does India have numerous French schools or is it just in any region? Uh,
Uh, Hey, Red Wolf. Yeah, so as French has many colonies, we do have French colonies in the eastern part of India, which is we have a few islands. When people think India, it's not just the entire mainland India. We do have union territories, which are islands in the Bay of Bengal, which is the east part of the India. In Indian Ocean, we have few islands. So there is the remnants of French culture. In fact, one French trader, he loved that island so much, he named it after him. It's called as Port Blair. But when Brits and French fought, French lost, and they built that entire island for jail. So to jail all the freedom fighters, giving the toughest of the prison sentence. But it's most in Goa. The French culture is still there. Uh, but French schools, I doubt it. But French language was prevalent. Conversational French, I believe, but not as exquisite French traditions or French wines, but still that over there.
yeah, thank you for answering that. Yeah, that's interesting because I didn't think too much because the French did play a part too.
They,
Yeah,
they did, and yeah, but British Empire is superior,
yeah,
defeating everyone except the Portuguese in the Goa. So they took over majority of the competition.
hmm yeah, they did. Um, I think Slot asked this question: do Indians make blood quantum a big deal when it comes to identity as terms of who's Indian? I think maybe an example of this could be like, say, one Indian, a man or woman, has a kid with a British person, and then maybe that person's half Indian, and then let's say that Indian person has kids with someone else that's non-Indian. Is
Mhm.
that kid maybe still looked at, or the person still looked at as still Indian? But like you said, you don't make it too much in terms of like identity, more so of something else. Or yeah, I'm curious on your.
So I doubt that any Indian guy was able to make a British woman fall or a colonial woman fall and okay. Things would have been really different. We would have found a diplomatic solution. It's not that didn't happen. But if at all, to my knowledge, nothing has happened of that such incidents. But the upbringing would be very much, if at all, the parent has an upbringing, he would try to at least understand the value of Indian culture. Something would be in a kid. But I don't think such things happened.
Yeah, yeah, because I don't
So
notice that much. Like with Spain, even the British and the United States, there was a lot of half European, half native children. Um, but in India, I don't
few
think.
women stayed back. They did stay back, expecting India to boom after independence, post independence. But you know, let's say Indian genes and Indian spice are very dominant. You don't see it anymore. So eventually, yeah, they're pretty much Indianized generation.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, but thank you again for answering that question. If you guys had any more, I think we'll just answer them when we just finish this last part here, and just we'll try and make this very quick, Garish. Um,
I wish I will. I'm sorry. Yeah.
huh? Sorry.
I'm sorry I'm giving you long answers, but yeah.
Oh no! I appreciate
That's
it.
all good, man.
Yeah, the audience enjoys it too, so thank you. Um, and then the just the similarities and differences. Now it's interesting with especially when we talk about sovereignty. In the United States, many nations have their own sovereignty. Where when the British left in India, it was kind of like one sovereignty, like united, you know? So it's very interesting between one and
So
the other.
we recently unveiled the world's largest statue commemorating a person. His name is Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. It's called a Statue of Unity. This guy, when British again played the divide and rule policy when leaving, what happened was he went painstakingly to all these states because India is essentially a land of kings. And if you have enough land, when I say enough land, each person used to have at least 110 acres or 500 acres of land. If you own land, you're considered a sovereign ruler. So this freedom fighter, he is actually supposed to be a prime minister of India, but he became the first defense minister of India. He painstakingly went to all the and queens and landlords. He convinced them, saying that you better stay with India. You cannot go, or he convinced them to stay with India. The situation at the time was it was in absolute, like zigzag map. It was thrown all over the place because there are no boundaries. There's nothing, no kind of demarcations. There's no proper quantification of which land is where, which boundary is where, which border is where. And added upon that, we got huge number of languages. So it just became one tough thing. But with the quick, swift diplomacy of this guy, he was able to integrate all of the states into the Union of India. Three states he couldn't do it in his lifetime. But another state, which I come from, he initiated military action because it's sitting in the heartland of India, or at least the side of India. He wants to be a part of Pakistan. Pakistan split. Uh, they took the fertile lands of East Pakistan and West Pakistan. And West Pakistan is what today calls Bangladesh. India liberated Bangladesh, and they said, "These have your independence and everything." So, but yeah, that's the sovereignty. Unlike in United States, where states have higher power against the federation, the separation of powers when it comes, states don't have that much, but I still believe it's a quasi-federal status.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how they're both very different from one another, um, and how but just you know the sovereignty of India itself, and just how different one state is compared to another as well.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. I think the other final part we wanted to bring up here was the the cultural understanding of like preserving nature and just like the spiritual connections that you see between like Native Americans and India. So I was just curious on your perspective on that, as you had brought it up a little bit earlier.
What we essentially call nature is basically the thing which you experience is outside, right? So you say environment or nature, anything which is outside you is what nature is. And if let's put it this way, observer and you observe something, right? Observer and the observed. And if you're able to break this boundary, no observer, there's no observer, it all becomes one. That is what yoga is. Yoga is essentially meaning union. You're trying to break or dissolve the boundaries between the creator and the creation, as simple as that. If you look at the Native American culture has vast, vast lands, like endless lands. If a chief or if a person from a Native American takes his herd of sheep or flock or cattle to graze, he would just sit there and he would just become still. Because when you're in contact with nature, of course, the first few minutes, your mind would just be thinking about, okay, your troubles with the clan, what are your problems with the clan. But once you're in touch with the nature, essentially your body is made of five. I mean, you can talk about other elements, but essentially your body is made of five elements: earth, air, fire, water, and space. We know the body is majority of water, 72%. Fire is of 16%. Earth is of 8%, and fire is of 4%. Space is of 6%. I believe somewhere I'm getting it wrong, but that is the configuration. If a person is in contact with this nature, you just is susceptible to the dimensions which is just beyond your understanding. And if you look, the Native American rituals, those are not in belief; those are of experience. So if something is of experience, it means it's a live process. That means a certain energy has been invested. That only happens if you're connected with nature. So what we call as the five elements: earth, air, fire, water, and space. We call them as Bhuta. Bhuta means elements. And Native American culture, uh, they predominantly deals with these elements of the forces of the nature. And unfortunately, much of it has been lost because it's an oral tradition. That's good because if I experience something, I would make sure that my fellow clan member was also experience it right away, and not through teaching but through experience. So transmission would happen it right away. But systematic cleansing and wiping has knocked it out. Whereas in India, the branch was so sophisticated, so precise. In fact, they even came up with exact ways. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to believe anything. You follow these rules. There are 112 ways for you to realize your connection and to achieve the ultimate. So this that's perfect. Like how do you sit? How do you eat? How do you drink? Or how do you breathe? So this is an entire sophisticated form of yoga, and this is organized here, and it's just not Native America. I wouldn't say it's not organized, but they were able to be in touch with the nature. They were able to grasp it from thin air, pursue the knowledge.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I completely agree with you, man. Like I was just watching a video the other day about the Mapuche people, which is are in southern Chile,
Mhm.
and there's issues going on right now between the settlers there, German settlers,
Mhm.
European settlers in southern Chile, and Mapuche people, and a lot of their land was taken from
Oh,
them by the Chilean government, and many of the settlers they don't believe that the Mapuche people should have their land back because they believe that they're not going to do anything with it. And the interview that I listened to from the Mapuche person said that we just want to keep nature, how it is. You know, why change it? Just leave the trees, how they are. Where the German settler believes that the land should be changed, more crops, more this and that, more cash crops and whatnot. So I definitely see where you're coming from, Garish, when you said that.
yeah. I mean, this is the nature of masculinity. When I say masculinity, not being men or gender of men, it's your desire to expand. Whereas feminine is about making sure that you have enough food for everyone. You try to act like a mother and you preserve what is there so that it is intact for eternity. Because you today keep chopping out every tree, and day comes with this. You have a lot of houses, but there's no trees. I mean, that is it. So we still need to go back to our course and make sure we preserve that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, Garish. And I'm hopeful for the future, as I've said, and I believe more people are realizing this and recognizing that indigenous people do play a prolific role in this world. Um, yeah, so I see a bright future.
Because those methods and traditions and the knowledge cannot be found in textbooks. They cannot be found in research lab. You have to experience it, and you experience it not from a logical mind, from submitting yourself, like how the Native Americans or indigenous people did. Submit. Your submission is susceptible to that kind of dimensions.
Yeah. No, again, that's super interesting. Um, I think that one thing to look at is just how, like you said, how much we have in common. Indigenous people, Indos in India as well. Just the respect for nature, wanting to preserve things, not destroy it, not ruin it. Of course, I understand the importance of building an economy, but I mean, you can see in countries like Brazil and Argentina, where many people in the government believe that forests, the Amazon rainforest, should be all gone and used to build the economy. It's a very colonial mindset to have. I wouldn't even say colonial; it's just evil.
We haven't even explored 1% of the Amazon rainforest. If you're trying to get rid of Amazon, 99% of the medicines on this planet, which I would call as the biggest pharmacy, the organic pharmacy, is lost. We haven't even explored the number of species, number of healing plants, and there's a whole system of. I mean, no wonder why one of the seven sages came to Central Africa. Just the knowledge again, South America and Central Africa, the knowledge of this has been shared, but uh, as you said, Gandhi says, nature is enough for man's deed, not for enough. Sorry, nature is enough for man's need, not for his greed. We should pay some sense, at least, so that future generation has something left.
That was beautifully well said, Girish, from Gandhi as well. Um, you know, uh, Thank you so much for like wanting to come on and staying on here. It really was fun. I enjoyed it. Um, I think we'll just move into like final thoughts. I really hope you had. It seemed like you had fun.
It is. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be a part to your wonderful community who are patiently listening, pushing questions. Um, I hope we can find. Again, those questions cannot be down in a two-line answer or three-line answer without trying to explain what's happening. Uh, Thank you, Gabby, for being there. So
Yeah,
what we need to share is a common legacy. We had common suffering, but what we need to forge forward is a common legacy where we need to experience, at least in this lifetime, what is meant to honor our traditions, cultures, and give it to our kids, to our upcoming generations, so that they are the ones who carry forward this proudly. So if you don't do this, whatever it is, either you have been doing this in a form of podcast. I think that's a significant
thank
uh,
you.
contribution or effort in that direction. But we hope multiple people come forward in this and help them realize that the past or their ancestry is not something to be ashamed of. I think most people have a very attitude of denial of their ancestry. But if at all we're able to project or if at all able to tell the truth, I think more people, not just from the Native Americans, more people would be willing to come and join hands of preserving this because uh, no amount of uh, no amount of digital device can store the information. Uh, and your iPhone may be smartphone, but it's not smart enough to understand a human. So we have that inner genius within us, and we are given methods to unlock that inner genius. When I say inner genius, not only caring for you, but for also everyone around you, just like how the tribal leaders did.
Mhm.
So that's my thoughts.
Oh, I love that. How we have the energy now. It's just coming
Yes.
together. and moving forward to make our world a better place.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Please.
I
Thank
love
you.
that. Love that a lot. Juanchalo, did you want to say anything, or were you good for the most part?
I was just gonna say, I really thank you two for coming on. I mean, you really gave a lot of insightful information about India. Like, there's way more below the surface than I would have ever expected. It's definitely not a simple topic in terms of the culture, the history, or there's just a lot of differences. And I think people have like a habit of trying to simplify things or trying to look at it from a lens of like, well, this is how I understand the world because this is how it is on my side in my experience. And so we have a habit of simplifying other people's like cultures or experiences and not realizing they could be completely different.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I remember this story. I just don't want to take much of your time. The first time I heard the word Native Indian is when I read a small storybook back in my childhood. It was when God wanted to create a perfect human being. So he took his sword down, he made it, he just put it in the pot to toast it. So since his afternoon he slept. By the time he came, it was just burned. He thought, oh, that's not a good person to make a man. So he just put it aside. So he was very careful this time. So he put the bread, so he pulled it out before. It was raw. I thought, oh, okay. I'm too anxious this time. So let me do it very calmly. So he proceeds to make it in a very precise way. And he takes it out and he looks it's perfect toast, perfect color, richness and texture. He says, you know what? This is the first person that's going to populate this earth. And legend says that that is a native Indian. So we are all perfect toasts. Kidding aside, essentially we all come from same bread. We're all toasted in different temperatures. So culturally, no matter how much we think we're thrown aside, we all share the uniqueness. We all share that commonality despite that uniqueness. So I hope. Thank you for giving this platform. As you're telling, I could see how Native American culture is also very very close in terms of spirit. So I hope other if we can have other indigenous people from Australia, New Zealand, that would be really great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll try to get that soon.
Yeah, we'll love to have them, someone on from there as well, and we'd love to have you on again too, Garish. You're more than welcome to come join a panel discussion or other.
Thank you guys for giving this platform. Thank you for letting us speak without any kind of interrupting. They're being very patient. Thank you, appreciate it.
No, it was fun.
It was
So again,
good.
Garish, thank you, and to the audience, thank you all for watching. Staying up, wanting to watch our videos again. We're very thankful for your support, and I'm going to drop the StreamYard link if anyone wants to like chat with us very briefly in the after party, because I think it's time to wrap this up. But that being said, we are going to finish this video. So yeah, thank you all for joining, and
Thank you.
I'm going to tell you guys good night and take care.